My name is Marcus Hoffman, and I'm 68 years old. I spent my career as an aerospace engineer and aviation historian, fascinated by the technological leaps that occurred during World War II. For decades, I believed I understood what happened to German aviation technology after the war. The Allies captured planes and engineers, studied the technology, and incorporated German innovations into their own aircraft development programs. It was a straightforward story of technological transfer, from defeated enemy to victorious powers. Then, 18 months ago, I discovered a cache of documents that revealed something far more complex and emotionally devastating. The German engineers who'd created the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft watched their life's work being systematically destroyed, stolen, and perverted in ways they'd never imagined. And their reactions to this fate were preserved in letters and diaries that had been hidden for nearly 8 decades. The discovery began at an estate sale in Connecticut. I'd gone looking for aviation memorabilia, hoping to find some wartime posters or perhaps a pilot's logbook. Instead, I found a trunk full of documents that had belonged to an American intelligence officer named Captain William Brenner, who'd been part of Operation Paperclip, the program that brought German scientists and engineers to the United States after the war. Among Brenner's effects were translated copies of private letters and diary entries from German aviation engineers, documents he'd apparently kept as personal souvenirs despite their classification. The first letter I read was from Kurt Tank, the brilliant designer who'd created the Focke-Wulf FW190 fighter. Written in July 1945, just weeks after Germany's surrender, it was addressed to his wife and described his first encounter with American technical intelligence teams at the Focke-Wulf facilities. Tank wrote, "They arrived today with trucks and lists. Not to interview us, not to learn from us, but to take everything, every prototype, every drawing, every test report, every piece of equipment. They're dismantling my life's work like scavengers picking over a corpse." When I tried to explain the significance of certain designs, the technical principles behind our innovations, they weren't interested in understanding. They just wanted to crate everything and ship it west before the Russians arrive. Tank's letter continued with increasing bitterness. The Americans keep calling this technological reparations, as if our knowledge and creativity were commodities to be seized like coal or steel. But what truly breaks my heart is watching them load the T-152 prototypes onto trucks. Those aircraft represent 10 years of research, thousands of hours of calculation and testing, the culmination of everything I've learned about aerodynamics and high-altitude flight. And they're being treated like war trophies, not technical achievements worthy of study and respect. I was struck by Tank's anguish, by the sense of violation he expressed at having his work taken, without any genuine interest in the principles behind it. I'd always assumed the Allies had eagerly learned from German engineers, had treated them as valuable sources of knowledge, but Tank's letter suggested something different, a kind of technological looting that treated innovations as prizes rather than ideas. As I read through more documents, a pattern emerged. German engineers across multiple aviation companies, Messerschmitt, Heinkel, Junkers, Arado, all expressed similar feelings of watching their work being stolen, destroyed, or misused without any understanding of the years of development that had gone into creating it. More troubling, they described watching Allied forces deliberately destroy prototypes and experimental aircraft that couldn't be easily transported, burning designs and research that represented cutting-edge aeronautical thinking. A particularly haunting letter came from Willy Messerschmitt, written in August 1945. He described watching American soldiers use his Me-262 jet fighters, the world's first operational jet fighters, as target practice. They lined up 5 Tu-62s on the airfield, Messerschmitt wrote, aircraft that had taken years to perfect, that represented revolutionary advances in propulsion and aerodynamics, and they destroyed them with machine gun fire. When I protested, an American officer told me they had enough examples for study and these were surplus. Surplus. As if revolutionary technology becomes obsolete simply because you have multiple examples. They don't understand that each aircraft has unique characteristics, that test pilots noted different handling qualities, that we were still learning from every plane we built. Now that knowledge is destroyed, and they don't even realize what they've lost. But the documents also revealed something more complex than simple technological theft. Some German engineers were genuinely torn about what was happening. They'd built these aircraft for the Nazi war machine, had designed them to kill Allied pilots, had contributed to a regime that had committed unthinkable atrocities. Now they were watching their creations being taken by the very nations they'd been trying to defeat, and their feelings mixed pride in their technical achievements with guilt about the purposes those achievements had served. A diary entry from Alexander Lippisch, designer of the revolutionary Me-163 rocket-powered interceptor, captured this ambivalence. "The Americans showed me photographs today. Photographs of what their bombers did to German cities, the destruction our fighters were supposed to prevent. Then they showed me photographs of concentration camps, of crimes committed by the regime we served. I designed the 163 to defend Germany, but what Germany became was indefensible. So now when I watch them dismantle my work, I feel grief, but also shame. Perhaps this is justice. Perhaps our innovations deserve to be taken from us, to be used by others who might employ them for better purposes." I spent weeks reading through these documents, dozens of letters and diary entries that painted a far more nuanced picture than I'd ever imagined. The German engineers weren't just concerned about losing their work. They were grappling with complex questions about technology, morality, and responsibility. They'd created revolutionary aircraft, but for a criminal regime. They'd advanced human knowledge, but in service of destruction. Now they were watching the fruits of their labor being seized, and their reactions mixed professional pride with moral confusion. Some engineers tried to sabotage the Allied seizure of their work. A letter from a Junkers engineer described deliberately providing incorrect information about the Jumo 004 jet engine, hoping to slow Allied understanding of the technology. Others cooperated eagerly, seeing Allied interest as validation of their achievements and hoping it would lead to opportunities to continue their work. A few refused to cooperate at all, maintaining dignified silence even when threatened with imprisonment. The most revealing documents concerned what happened after the initial seizure phase, when German engineers began to learn how the Allies were actually using their technology. In late 1945 and early 1946, some engineers who'd been brought to America or Britain as part of Operation Paperclip started receiving information about how their designs were being tested, modified, and incorporated into Allied aircraft programs. Kurt Tank, who eventually ended up working in Argentina rather than for the Americans, wrote a bitter letter in December 1945 after learning that American engineers were testing his FW-190 designs by essentially copying components without understanding the integrated nature of his design philosophy. "They take the wing design but change the engine," Tank wrote. "They copy the landing gear but modify the fuselage. They don't understand that every element of an aircraft design is interconnected, that changing one component affects everything else. They're treating aeronautical engineering like children taking apart a clock, grabbing the pieces they think look interesting without understanding how they work together." But Tank's greatest frustration was reserved for what he called the waste of knowledge. The Allies had captured hundreds of German engineers with decades of collective experience in advanced aeronautics. Rather than systematically debriefing them, learning their methodologies, understanding their design philosophies, the Allied forces were primarily interested in physical hardware and drawings. The human knowledge, the intuitive understanding that came from years of testing and refinement, was being ignored. "They could learn so much," Tank wrote, "if only they would ask the right questions. Not how fast does it fly, but why did you choose this airfoil section? Not what weapons does it carry, but how did you solve the flutter problem at high speeds? The physical aircraft will eventually be understood through testing, but the design reasoning, the knowledge of what we tried and discarded, why certain approaches didn't work, that can only come from the engineers themselves. And they're not interested." I found similar frustrations expressed by engineers from other companies. Willie Messerschmitt lamented that Allied engineers were so focused on the Me-262's jet engines that they completely overlooked other innovations in the aircraft's design. Swept wings designed to delay compressibility effects, hydraulic systems that operated at extreme altitudes, cockpit layouts optimized for high-speed combat. These innovations were dismissed as secondary when they actually represented years of research that could have advanced Allied aviation immediately. As I researched further, trying to verify and contextualize these documents, I discovered that some of the German engineers' fears were well-founded. Allied forces had indeed destroyed significant amounts of irreplaceable prototypes and research materials. In some cases, this was deliberate policy, ensuring that technology couldn't fall into Soviet hands as the wartime alliance fractured. In other cases, It was simple ignorance, soldiers and junior officers not recognizing the value of what they were destroying. A particularly tragic example emerged from documents about the Horten Ho 229, an experimental flying wing-jet aircraft that was decades ahead of its time. The Horten brothers, Walter and Reimar, had built several prototypes of this revolutionary design. Allied forces captured some of these aircraft, but destroyed others and lost crucial documentation in the chaos of the immediate post-war period. Reimar Horten's diary entries from 1946 described his devastation at learning that experimental data from wind tunnel tests had been used as kindling to start fires, that prototype components had been scrapped for metal, that years of research had simply vanished. "We weren't just building aircraft," Reimar wrote. "We were exploring the fundamental principles of flight, pushing toward a future where aircraft would be faster, more efficient, more capable than anything humanity had yet achieved." The Ho 229 was a proof of concept, demonstrating that flying wing designs could work with jet propulsion. Every test flight, every modification, taught us something about aerodynamics that no textbook could provide. And now that knowledge is scattered, destroyed, lost. In 50 years, engineers will try to develop flying wing designs, and they'll have to rediscover principles we'd already learned because the Allies couldn't be bothered to preserve our research. The documents also revealed a darker aspect of the post-war technological seizure, the extent to which German engineers felt used and discarded once their immediate usefulness ended. Engineers who'd been brought to America or Britain under Operation Paperclip found themselves in limbo, unable to return home but also unable to fully participate in Allied aviation programs. They were consulted on German technology but excluded from new Allied projects. They were paid modestly but denied opportunities for independent work. They were refugees from a defeated nation, their expertise valued but their humanity largely ignored. A letter from Messerschmitt in 1947 captured this painful reality. "I am an aeronautical engineer, one of the best in the world, with 30 years of experience designing successful aircraft. Yet here I sit in American custody, my freedom restricted, my career finished, my reputation destroyed by association with a regime I didn't control. Young American engineers who know a fraction of what I know about high-speed flight are designing the next generation of aircraft, while I'm only consulted about technical details of planes I designed a decade ago. I understand why this is happening. I understand that I'm a citizen of a defeated enemy nation, that my work contributed to German military power, that I must bear some responsibility for what Germany became. But it's still bitter, watching my knowledge being extracted like minerals from a mine, while I'm denied any opportunity to continue advancing the field I've devoted my life to." As I read through these documents, I found myself grappling with complicated emotions. These were brilliant engineers who'd advanced human knowledge significantly, but they'd done so in service of Nazi Germany. They deserved credit for their technical achievements, but they also bore responsibility for who they'd served. The Allied seizure of their work was arguably justified as reparations for German aggression, but it was also a kind of intellectual theft that destroyed knowledge and wasted human expertise. I decided to write a comprehensive article about these findings, titled "After the Fall, German Aviation Engineers and the Fate of Luftwaffe Technology, 1945-1950. I submitted it to the Journal of Aviation History, including extensive excerpts from the letters and diaries I'd discovered. The article was accepted for publication, and it appeared in print in March of last year. The response was immediate and divided. Aviation historians praised the article for revealing previously unknown perspectives on the post-war technological transfer. Some German historians appreciated the humanization of engineers who'd been dismissed simply as Nazi collaborators. But I also received angry criticism from people who felt I was expressing sympathy for individuals who'd served Hitler's regime, that I was prioritizing their hurt feelings over the devastation Germany had caused. The criticism forced me to think carefully about what I was actually arguing. I wasn't suggesting that the German engineers were victims in any moral sense. They'd been part of a genocidal regime and bore responsibility for that. I wasn't arguing that the Allies were wrong to seize German technology. It was legitimate reparation for German aggression. What I was highlighting was the human cost of how that seizure was conducted, the waste of knowledge, the destruction of research, the failure to systematically learn from engineers who'd spent decades pushing the boundaries of aviation. In May, I was invited to speak at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. presenting my research to an audience of aviation enthusiasts and historians. I focused on the technical waste, describing how much knowledge had been lost through careless destruction of prototypes and research materials. I showed examples of innovations that had been overlooked by Allied intelligence teams, design elements that wouldn't be rediscovered for years or decades. The tragedy here isn't that German engineers felt bad about losing their work, I explained to the assembled audience. The tragedy is that humanity lost knowledge that could have advanced aviation more rapidly, wind tunnel data that was destroyed, flight test results that were lost, design methodologies that were never properly documented. All of this represented years of research that simply vanished. When we look at post-war aviation development, we can see the Allies struggling to understand principles that German engineers had already mastered. That struggle could have been shortened if the technological seizure had been more systematic, more focused on capturing knowledge rather than just hardware. A veteran who'd flown bombers over Germany stood during the question period. His voice was tight with emotion as he spoke. "Professor Hoffman, these men you're talking about, they built the fighters that killed my friends. They designed the interceptors that shot down American bombers. You're asking us to feel sorry for them because we took their precious designs? They were lucky we didn't execute them as war criminals." I understood his anger, had anticipated it. "Sir, I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for them. I'm pointing out that we had an opportunity to capture knowledge that could have advanced aviation for all of humanity, and we partly squandered that opportunity. Whether the German engineers deserved better treatment is a moral question we can debate. But whether we should have done a better job preserving their knowledge is a practical question with a clear answer. Yes, we should have. Not for their sake, but for ours." The exchange highlighted the central tension in my research. Separating technical achievement from moral culpability was difficult, perhaps impossible. The German engineers had advanced aviation significantly, but they'd done so for monstrous purposes. Acknowledging their expertise didn't require excusing their choices, but it also didn't require dismissing the value of what they'd learned. Over the following months, I continued researching, tracking down more sources, and trying to understand the long-term impact of how German aviation technology was handled after the war. I discovered that some Allied programs had indeed benefited enormously from German work. The development of swept-wing aircraft, improvements in jet engine design, advances in high-altitude flight systems all drew heavily on German research. But I also found numerous examples of wasted opportunities, promising German designs that were never properly evaluated, research directions that were abandoned, innovations that were overlooked. The most significant waste concerned what the German engineers called negative knowledge, understanding what doesn't work and why. German aviation had spent years testing designs and approaches that failed, learning valuable lessons about what to avoid. Much of that negative knowledge was never transferred to Allied programs because it wasn't captured in physical hardware or formal reports. It existed only in the minds of engineers who'd conducted the failed experiments, and Allied intelligence teams never systematically debriefed them about those failures. "We could have saved them years," Kurt Tank wrote in a letter from 1948 after learning about an American research program that was exploring an aerodynamic approach he'd tested and abandoned in 1942. "We already know that configuration causes dangerous flutter at high speeds. We already know the control forces become unmanageable. We already know it doesn't work. But because no one asked us, because no one wanted to hear about our failures, only our successes, American engineers will waste time and money rediscovering what we already learned the hard way." In December, I received an unexpected email from Klaus Messerschmitt, grandson of Willy Messerschmitt. He'd read my article and wanted to share additional family documents that his grandfather had kept. We arranged to meet in Munich, and in January I flew to Germany to examine these materials. Klaus lived in a modern apartment in central Munich, but his study was filled with artifacts from his grandfather's career. Photographs of aircraft lined the walls, models sat on every surface, and filing cabinets held decades of personal correspondence. He showed me letters his grandfather had written to family members in the late 1940s and early 1950s, documents that revealed the designer's continuing frustration with how his work had been treated. One letter particularly stood out, written in 1950, after Messerschmitt had learned that the US Air Force was developing swept-wing fighters based partly on German research. "They're finally doing it right," Messerschmitt wrote with evident satisfaction. The new American fighters incorporate principles we established with the P-1101 prototype: swept wings, high thrust-to-weight ratios, careful attention to transonic effects. It took them 5 years, but they've finally understood what we were trying to achieve. I should feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired. If they'd listened in 1945, if they'd truly learned from us, rather than just taking our hardware, they could have had these aircraft years earlier. How many pilots died in the interim, flying inferior aircraft into combat in Korea? How much money was wasted rediscovering principles we'd already established? Klaus and I talked for hours about his grandfather's legacy, about the complexity of honoring technical achievement while acknowledging moral failure. Willy Messerschmitt had been a brilliant engineer who'd advanced aviation significantly, but he'd also been a willing participant in the Nazi war effort, had used slave labor in his factories, had profited from Germany's aggressive wars. Both things were true and neither could be ignored. My grandfather never fully accepted responsibility for his role in the Nazi system, Klaus told me honestly. He always saw himself as an engineer first, a German second, and only incidentally as someone who'd worked for Hitler. That was a moral failure on his part, but his technical achievements were still real, and the knowledge he'd accumulated was still valuable. The Allies were right to take his work as reparations, but they could have been smarter about how they did it. They could have captured more knowledge, preserved more research, learned more lessons. That failure wasn't about justice or morality, it was about competence. I returned to the United States with copies of additional documents, more pieces of the puzzle. Over the following months, I expanded my research into a book, tentatively titled The Seizure of Knowledge: German Aviation Engineers and the Post-War Technology Transfer. The book would tell the full story of what happened to Luftwaffe aircraft and their designers after Germany's defeat, incorporating the human perspective that had been missing from technical histories. As I wrote, I tried to maintain balance, acknowledging German engineering excellence while not excusing German engineers' complicity in Nazi crimes, recognizing the legitimacy of Allied technological seizure while critiquing the wastefulness of how it was executed, respecting the feelings of Allied veterans who'd fought against these weapons while preserving the perspectives of the engineers who'd created them. The central argument of my book was that humanity had lost significant knowledge through careless handling of German aviation research after World War II. This wasn't about feeling sorry for German engineers. It was about recognizing that knowledge is valuable regardless of its source, and that destroying or wasting that knowledge served no one's interests. The Allies had been right to seize German technology as reparations, but they should have been more systematic, more thorough, more focused on capturing not just hardware, but understanding. In June, I delivered the completed manuscript to my publisher. The book is scheduled for release next spring, and I expect it will generate significant discussion and controversy. Some will see it as giving too much sympathy to individuals who served Nazi Germany. Others will see it as an important recovery of lost historical perspective. Both reactions are probably valid. What I know is this: the German engineers who created the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft watched their life's work being seized, destroyed, and repurposed in ways they'd never imagined. Their reactions to this fate, preserved in letters and diaries that were hidden for decades, reveal the human dimension of technological transfer, the emotional cost of seeing your achievements taken and your expertise dismissed. Understanding those reactions doesn't require excusing their service to an evil regime, but it does require acknowledging that they were human beings with complex feelings about complex situations. The most brilliant aviation engineers of their generation watched their innovations become spoils of war. Some felt violated, some felt relieved, some felt conflicted. All of them recognized that they were witnessing the end of German aviation dominance and the beginning of an era where their knowledge would be filtered through the priorities and understanding of former enemies. What they said when they realized this, recorded in private writings they never expected to become public, reveals the painful transition from Nazi technologist to Cold War refugee, from respected designer to defeated enemy, from innovator to historical footnote. Their story deserves to be told, not because they were victims, they weren't, but because understanding how knowledge was transferred, preserved, wasted, and transformed after World War II teaches important lessons about technology, morality, and the complicated legacies of conflict. The fate of Luftwaffe planes after 1945 wasn't just about hardware being seized and studied. It was about human expertise being extracted, knowledge being lost, and innovations being repurposed, all filtered through the chaos and moral complexity of the immediate post-war period. That story, finally revealed through documents hidden for 8 decades, changes how we understand both the technological legacy of World War II and the human cost of transferring knowledge from defeated enemy to victorious power.